Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's free LSAT prep hour. We are going to talk about replaying games. And before we get started, just a couple of things about logistics. Here's some information about where you can find other free resources on our website. Everyone is muted and your camera is off. I'll ask that you please communicate via chat tonight. We'll start by setting up the game and I'll ask you to chat into me what you found challenging about it, and I'll ask you to chat in answers. Also, feel free to chat in any questions that you have as you go along. Just please keep in mind that it may take me a minute to respond, especially if I'm talking, but I will get to your question. So like I said, what we're going to cover tonight is replaying games. We will play one game together and then we'll go back and replay that game. The goal is to learn something about the game and about games in general. Replaying games is one of the best things that you can do to get comfortable playing games and to get better with time. Games are like puzzles. There are really only so many different ways that games work. And you can almost always replay a game at least two, sometimes three or four different ways. And being able to do a game in different ways makes them easier and less stressful, because then you're not just stuck with one tool, you have multiple tools. And it also helps you see some of the hidden things in games that are very hard to see the first time. So I'm going to list some different ways to play games. Because what's important when you replay a game is that you do it a different way the second time. There's no one perfect way to do it the first time and one perfect way to do it the second time. This is really going to depend on personally where you are with games, how you feel about the games, what you want to learn with the games. But I'm going to list out some different ways of playing games in general and then talk about what we're going to do tonight. So one way is to do all the questions in order. Another way is to do the conditional questions first. That's actually my favorite way of doing games, but you may have your own favorite way of doing games. Another way is to make frames. Frames can't be made for every game. And remember, frames just means making more than one diagram. Sometimes you can work out some of the possible ways that a game can be played. Sometimes you can work out all the possible ways a game can be played, but it's helpful if you can see it. And then maybe you might be able to make some big inferences up front. You can also, if you really want to get into a game, is test every answer when you go through the questions. Testing every answer can be a good way to get comfortable testing answers. You can't really test every answer for every question. That's going to take too long, but sometimes you do need to test answers, and it's good to feel comfortable doing that. It can also help you see the ways that maybe some previous work that you generated on one answer or one question can help you with another question. So for the game that we're going to do it first by doing all the questions in order. I'll give you the game, some time to set it up, and then we'll go through every question but the orientation question together if we have time. And then we're going to go back through it and see if we can make frames. I think this is also a really helpful way of learning how to do frames. It can be hard to see up front whether it makes sense to frame a game. And the way that I learned to frame games was just to play a game and then the next day replay it and see if I could make frames. That helped me see the patterns in games where it was going to be useful to frame and where it wasn't. And after a couple of months of doing that, it just clicked. Any questions about anything I've talked about so far? If so, throw them in chat. Okay, so let's start with the game. Here's your game. Take 3 minutes to set it up. So you can take 30 more seconds to set this up. So wrap up there, wherever you are, and chat into me what you found challenging about this game setup. If it was your favorite setup ever, you can chat me that too. Okay. So here is the setup for the game. Okay, glad you can hear me. I'm going to assume everybody's okay with this, but if anyone has any questions, let me know. Okay. So G is tricky. And this is where we want to pay really close attention to the third rule. So the question is whether or not G can be in spot 3, since we know that J can't be in spot 4. And notice the kind of weird way that I've diagrammed this rule. It doesn't just say G is before J. It says if J, then G is before J. So be careful here. This is a conditional rule. Anytime you have a J, let's say I put a J in spot 2, then we have to put a G before it. But we could put a G anywhere without a J because the rule is triggered by J, not by G. Yeah, we can put J in other places, and wherever we put it, we'll have to put a G in front of it, but a G could also be independent. Also, make a note of the second rule. Be a little bit careful with this one. The wording says that there's at least one G and between the two M's, but we don't know how many spaces are going to be in between these two M's. There could be an M, a G, a T, something else, an M, a G, a J, a T, and then an M. We don't really know. So I didn't box this. I just put the M dash M. But remember, they don't have to be next to each other. So here's your first question. Work it out and chat your answer when you have it. So for this question, if we kept track of our antes and made a couple of small inferences on the diagram up front, it's pretty straightforward. Because we know already, just based on what we have on the number line, T can't go in 6 because T has to be in 7 and we can't have two elements next to each other. A J always has to be preceded by a G, so J can't go in spot 1. And then that first rule that J can't go in spot 4. And whenever you have a must be question, remember that the answer to a must be question is an inference. And that's true of a must be true question or a must be false question. So whenever you have inferences, scan those inferences first to see if you already have an answer. We already know that T can't go in 6 because it's got to be in 7. So A is our answer and we're done. Now you don't always have an inference. Sometimes it might be an inference that you didn't see up front, and that's totally fine. If we didn't have the inference, we would have tested out the answers. But if you do have inferences, scan them first. Any questions about this? Okay. So let's get into a trickier question. Chat in your answer when you have it. So if you have an answer, chat it in. If not, go ahead and take a guess. Okay. So I'm going to work through the way that I would do this one. And then if you have something different or if you have a question, we can talk about it. So our condition is that t is in 5. So I'm going to put the condition into the diagram and then see what has to be true after that. One of the most restrictive rules, I think, is MGM, because we have to have room for that GM sandwich somewhere. And we're also going to need to put J somewhere and have a G in front of it. So I can basically put J in 2 or 3. Doesn't matter. I'm going to put J in 3 just so I have a little bit more wiggle room with the M sandwich. And I can do M here. And then I've got one more M that I have to deal with. And I could put it here, or I could put it here. And then I could put a G in either of those other 2 spots, and it would be okay. And now I'm going to go through the answers because it's a could be question and see if we have something that could be true. I don't have T in 1, don't have M in 2, I don't have G in 3, but I do have a possibility for M in 4, and that's fine. And D is the answer. Questions about this one? let's take a look at A, because this one's a little tricky. So let's say we've got T in spot 1, and then I'm in trouble with the M and G sandwich, because the only way to make this work and have M on the other side of the G would be to put G and J and 3 and 4, but that violates J being in spot 4, so A can't work. That's just to show you what it looks like, because A was one of the answers chosen. I probably would not test it unless I absolutely had to. It's a little bit easier to make the diagram and then go through the questions. Questions about this? Okay. Next one, 14. You can work it out and chat your answer in when you have it. Okay. So if you have an answer, chat it in. If not, take a guess. Okay. So we've got another conditional question. So I'm going to work this one out same way, put in the condition and follow it from there. Normally, I would have kept the work from the other questions, but for this round of playing the game, I really want to focus on just going question by question and seeing how I can best understand the question itself and how I can best get through the answers. So I've been clearing it, but generally you would want to keep your work. All right, so if J is in 5, we know that G has to be in 4. And now what has to be true? Because this one's a must be question. What I know is that the MG sandwich has to go somewhere. So I could put an M in 2 or 3, and that would be okay. But I've got to have an M in 6, and that's answer choice E. questions about this one? And if you wanted to do this more fully, which is probably a better idea than the shortcut I just did, just so you can make sure that it works, I would probably put something in 3 to see if it would be okay. I could put T there and that's fine. And then these two are interchangeable and that's okay. Okay. So now let's do 15. Chat your answer in when you have it. Okay. Another conditional question. For this one, we don't even have to try to do the conditional questions first. They're just giving us a whole bunch of conditionals in a row. So we've got G in 1 and T in 2. Now what's limited at this point? The GJ and the M and G sandwich. So because I'm going to have to get G and J between the two M's, I'm going to have to put them here. And then the M's on each side. So what has to be true? M in week 3. Any questions about this? Okay. Next question, a little bit weirder. Oh. So here's 16. Chat your answer in when you have it. So if you have an answer, chat it in. If not, go ahead and take a guess. Okay. So we've got M in spot 3. And there are a couple of ways that it could play out after this, at least in terms of the MGM sandwich. We could maybe have an M in spot 1 or an M going in the other direction. Got to make sure to get G and J somewhere, but I feel like there are a few places where I could make G and J work. I could make it work here and then put the MGM sandwich on the other side. Or I could put G and J over here and make the MGM sandwich work on either way. So in this case, I'm just going to test the answers. Especially since it's just a could be. As soon as we find something that works, then we're done. So A, G and 4, T and 5. I could make that work by putting the MGM sandwich here and G and J at the beginning. That's fine. A is the answer. Questions about this one? Okay. One more question, and then we'll go back and look for frames. Last one, chat your answer in when you have it. If you have an answer, chat it in, not take a guess. Okay. This one is tricky. It is another unconditional must be question. This one, a must be true. So I know the answer is an inference, but it's not any of the inferences that I already have. So I know that there's a big inference for the game that I don't have. That's okay. It just means that I'm going to have to do a little bit more work for this question. And I think because there's an inference I don't have, and I'm playing the game to understand it rather than for time, I would want to go through each answer one at a time. So do I have to have G in 1 or 2? Well, I'll just test that by not putting G in 1 or 2. Let's say we do GJ, and then we'll make the M sandwich. Ooh, let's make the M sandwich around 2 G's. Why not? Or didn't mean to do that. That should be a T. So I'll try putting, I think I messed it up by putting that G too far over. So I'll have to put GJ here. And then I can make the MG sandwich and put T in the first spot. And I don't have a G in 1 or 2. Do I have to have an M in 2 or 3? Seems unlikely, but let's try it. And I'm just gonna kind of use the information that I have here to maybe spread this out a little bit. So I'll put, let's say, an M here and an M here, GJ in the middle, TG here. B's gone. Can I get 3 G's? So this is where it's going to start getting tricky because C, D, and E basically are asking you to have 3 repeaters of the same element to try it out. So I'm going to try spreading out these G's as much as I can. That's fine. Got 3 G's, got an MGM sandwich. I've got G and J, so that's good. Answer choice D. Let's see if we can do 3D or 3 J's. This one seems a little bit trickier just because we only actually have 3 options for J left. In order to make 3 J's in the spots left, I would have to do something like this or like this, because it can't have a J in 1, can't have a J in 4, 7's already taken. So the only way to get 3 J's would be to put 2 J's together and 2 and 3, or to put 2 J's together and 5 and 6. That violates the GJ rule and the can't have 2 next to each other rule. So D is the answer. However, most of you chatted in, or a lot of you chatted in E. So let's try E out as well, because T also seems like it would be tough to make it work. So let's try and see if we can. Because again, on test day, I'm not going to go here, but today I just want to understand the game a little bit more. So I'm going to try and spread this out. Got to get this MGJ sandwich. So Can't put GJ here, so I'll do another T. GJ. And we've got the MGM sandwich, GJ, and 3 T's. Questions about this one? Okay. All right, so now let's replay this game. And normally, ideally, you want to do a replay the next day. It doesn't really matter if you remember the answers. And I'm actually going to put the answers up for each question because all I want to do is see if there was a different way I could have played the game to get to that answer and see if maybe that would have been a little bit faster or help me learn something about the game. And since I'm practicing frames today, I want to see if there's a way that I can frame this game just to learn if this might have been a game that I could have framed up front. If I see something similar next time, I'll know to frame up front. So what we want to look for is something restricted. So what seems restricted or limited about the game? And I want everyone to take a second and think about it. And then chat into me something you think you want to try to frame around. Or you think you might want to try to frame around. Yeah, I thought about the M's, but here's the problem with the M's. They're pretty variable. And as long as I've got two of them and they aren't next to each other, and somehow I can get a G in the middle of them, these two M's are pretty endless. They can't go in 7 because nothing else could go in 7, but that's basically it. I could put 1 and 1 and then 3, 4, 5, 6, 2, 4, 5, 6, 3, 1, 5, 6. That's getting into way too many options. Yeah, the JGs seem a little better. And I did frame around the JGs for 2 reasons. One, J is really limited. We just did that last question, and it's okay if you don't see this up front. If you saw that from the question you did, that's fine. That's why we're learning how to frame when we replay, that the J's are really limited. So J can only go in 2, 3, 5, or 6. And a G has to go before the J every time. So what's going to happen is when I place a J, I've also got a G. And then that's going to give me some more limited options for the M's. Plus, this is neat. This is 4 different frames. Either a J is in 2, 3, 5, or 6. So if a J is in 2, G is in 1. I'm not going to fill out the rest of this because I know that I have to get two M's over here somewhere. So I'm going to put my two M's over here at some point, but they're fairly open. I could have M 3, 4, 5, 6 as long as I've got a space between them, but that's okay. That's starting to limit this a little bit. Then I could put a J in 3, which is going to put a G in 4. Here, I know that there's at least one M over here somewhere, although it could be, they could be 1 and 4, but at least there's one M that's going to come after that JG chunk, or they could be both after the JG chunk. Don't really know. Next one, I could put J and G in 4 and 5. And that's going to be the same thing as the one below it, but kind of in reverse. There's got to be an M over here somewhere. There could also be an M in 6, or both M's could be over here. And then if I put J in 6 and G before it, then both M's have to be over here somewhere. Those aren't complete frames, but that's okay, because that gives me all 4 possibilities for how G and J can work out. And so what I want to do is, one, see if there are any inferences that I could make from this, and see if there's any way I could have gotten that J inference from this, and then go back through the questions and see if I can do the questions a little bit faster or a little bit more easily with these frames. Then that'll help me decide if a frame like this might be worth doing in the future. I think I could probably get the J inference from this, because as we see visually, which is a lot easier, JG's got to be a chunk, and there's no room for 3 JG chunks. Once we've got JG here, 2 M's are in this spot, we could maybe put another JG chunk, but not 2 of them. Same thing for this one, and the one at the top. So there's a question about what games do frames not work for. And the games where I would probably not even think about framing up front are games that are pretty open-ended. If I ask myself what seems restricted or limited and I can't come up with a concrete answer, then I'm probably not going to frame. And also, if it seems like there are more than 4 possibilities, then I won't frame. So for example, the J and G is definitely restricted in this game. But let's say there were 8 spots here instead of 7, and maybe there were 5 different places for G and J, then I wouldn't frame. I only go up to 4. So for the first question, the answer to this one, for the first question we did together, the answer to this one is A. We had that from our inference that T can't be in 6. That's not very affected by the frames. That's okay. I'm going to note it and then go to the next one. Next question is 13. The answer was D. I want everyone to look at the frames and see if you can tell me a way that you could have gotten to answer choice D just using the frames. Or if it could have been a little bit, if there's a way it could have been a little bit easier using the frames. For this one, I probably would have gone to this frame at the bottom here to try it out first, because the condition is that T's in spot 5. And in those top 2 frames, there's a J or a G in spot 5. This third frame, maybe I can make it work, but it's not as open. This last one is fairly open. So I know that as long as I've got my M sandwich in here, it's going to work. So I'm going to have an M here and then another M with these two. And that would get us to answer choice D. Maybe a little bit faster because it's a little bit less work to do. Questions about this? We've got 5 minutes left. So we're going to do one more question with these frames and then talk a little bit about what we can note to remember about this game. So the next one, number 14. Take a minute to see if you could use the frames to make 14 a little bit easier. So for this one, since we framed around the J, I'm going to use the J in week 5 frame, which looked like this. And then the other part of the condition is that G's in 1 don't necessarily have to have a J in spot 2, although we could. But what happens now? Based on this frame, I know that I have to have an M in one of these 2 spots. And I know that I have to have an M in 6, which is E. Again, similar to what we worked out before, but it could make it a little bit easier with a little less guesswork. Any questions about this? Okay. And then last thing you want to do after you replay a game is take a minute to note what you learned about this game. So take a second to note anything you learned about this game and chat into me something you wrote down. Yeah, honestly, I did not love frames in the beginning either. But once I started replaying like this, it made them so much less stressful because once I played the game once, I could then understand the game a little bit more, which made seeing frames a lot easier the second time. And after I did that enough times, I started to be able to see frames at the beginning. And what I learned about this particular game that I also found very useful when I was learning to frame is that frames don't have to be complete in order to be useful. And I often don't feel like I have to have complete frames for a game. If I have complete frames, then great. But if the frames are enough to show me a pattern of what's limited about the game, then that's fine. Okay. So that is our hour. Thank you all for coming and have a good night, everyone.